And here we are. We made it to the end of the week. Finally, it's Friday, and we're here with your final Morning Pitt of the week on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. While you're watching this video, make sure you like this video. Hit subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a little blue rectangle right down there. It says subscribe. Click that button so you never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That includes our live Panther-Lair show that we do every week on Wednesday nights, mostly on Wednesday nights at 8:30 p.m. Sometimes, due to Pitt basketball games on Wednesday nights, we move that back to Tuesdays. And if you want to make sure you don't miss those moves, or you don't want to miss it, if you want to make sure you don't miss it when we happen to do a live show, like a post-game show or something like that. We might do some post-game shows after Pitt basketball games this year. Maybe on weekends. We'll see what we can work out. But if you want to make sure you don't miss those, click the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and you'll get an alert sent to your phone so you'll never miss any. It'll say, hey, they're going live, so you don't want to miss this. And you be sure to tune in. So if we have to change the date on a live show instead of a Wednesday, we move it to a Tuesday or whatever it may be, you don't have to worry about any of that. We will send you an alert about it. So click subscribe, like this video. You will never miss anything that we do. And, it's been, this week has been what you expect a week in December to be. It's been wild. The coach has been all over the place. There have been commitments. There have been transfers. It always was. December always was a really active month. I mean, way back in the day when I first started doing this in like 2005 or 2006 or somewhere around there. I mean, December was when the action really happened. December and January really is when it all went down, because the regular season would end and the coaches would hit the road. They'd go out and conduct in-home visits, visit with the recruits off campus, go to their schools, go to their houses, really kind of solidify their class and land those couple final few pieces to top off the class that they'd sign in February. And it was as good as it gets. I mean, December and January were the hot items. That was when it was really active and really fun. There were 3 big months. There was June, there was December, and there was January in terms of recruiting activity, heading into the first Wednesday in February, which was signing day. A few years ago, they added the December signing day. That made December a whole lot more important, took a little bit of the heat off of January, but also turned up the volume on June. It made June even more wild than it was before. And June was always a big recruiting month, and it really it took off because you could have official visits in June. And so all of a sudden things got really crazy in June, got really crazy in December, and kind of cooled off a little bit in January because a lot of the recruiting classes were already filled. And then comes the transfer portal. And now what you have here is just this, perfect storm of, recruiting activity where the coaches are out visiting high school prospects in their homes and at their schools. You've got transfer portal activity where kids from your team are going into the portal and you're trying to get kids from the portal to join your team. And so you're trying to recruit those guys. You've got a couple official visit weekends here that you can bring kids to campus and try and lock it all up before you get to signing day, which is less than 2 weeks away. It's December 21st. That Wednesday is National Letter of Intent signing day. And we talked, I think it was on the Panther-Lair show on Tuesday night this week, the live show, that signing day is a big deal. It's when everything is sort of centered and focused, and that's when all the action happens. But the reality is, if there's a transfer, and the things that transfers have to do, they have to fill out the paperwork to apply for admission to the college. Like that's what they have to do. The National Letter of Intent kind of doesn't matter. A lot of them do it that day. It's exciting. It's fun. You can be part of all the pomp and circumstance. And this actually applies to the recruits too. The recruits, like if a recruit doesn't sign on signing day and just goes through the process of submitting his paperwork for admission and all the aid packages and all of those things, he can just enroll in college. He doesn't have to actually do signing day. Particularly if they want to enroll in January. It's not, there's no need for it. So even if there's a guy, a transfer or whoever that doesn't sign by signing day, you still end up, you could still end up getting those guys. I feel like Kanate Mumfield might have gone past signing day. I forget exactly when he committed to Pitt and signed. It doesn't matter though. Ultimately, this next, week and a half or so, less than 2 weeks, is going to be it's going to be wild. And like I say, it always is. And usually it's right at the end of the regular season. This year, they actually changed the clock a little bit, changed the calendar. And instead of going into the contact period, which is that point on the recruiting calendar when coaches can have in-person contact with recruits and transfers off campus. That's really the important distinction. When you hear people talk about contact period, quiet period, dead period, the thing that's really being distinguished there, or the distinction that's being made there is where you can have in-person contact. During a dead period, you can't have any in-person contact at all. It doesn't matter where it happens. During a quiet period, you can have in-person contact, but it has to be on campus. And then during the contact period, that's when, to some extent, all hell breaks loose and things just get wild and coaches are on the road because they can have these in-home visits. And you see all the tweets on, the photos and everything where, they're all standing in the living room in their socks, having dinner with mom and dad and all that kind of thing. That's what happens now. It's the contact period. And it used to start right at the end of the regular season. Well, this year they changed the calendar because of, the conference championship games. The teams that were participating in the conference championship games and maybe even teams that weren't participating said, well, this isn't fair. Those teams that are playing in the conference championship games can't go on the road and recruit that week right after the end of the regular season because they're preparing for the conference title game. And so it's an unfair advantage. To me, I kind of look at it like, well, it's, sort of, it's not entirely like this, but it's kind of like getting, the team that finishes last gets to draft first. And that's not really how it works because those teams that are playing the conference championship games usually are the ones that are the best teams in the country anyway, and they're probably going to hold on to their recruits no matter what. But I don't mind giving those teams that failed to make the conference championship game just a little bit of an advantage of an extra visit, an extra week of visits. But we cannot upset those at the top of the sport like last year when it was Pitt and Wake Forest. And so we have to change the rules to make it as fair as possible for everyone in a sport that's inherently unfair, just in its imbalance of, sort of how the resources are generated. We're getting off on a tangent here. But the main point is they pushed the calendar back. And instead of that contact period starting right at the end of the regular season, it didn't start until last Friday, the day before the conference championship games. And so since then, for the last week, the coaches have been on the road. The coaches have been out recruiting. The coaches have been looking at guys, visiting with guys, trying to find transfer candidates, trying to find high school prospects to fill out the class. And we've talked about all of this throughout the week. And we'll continue to talk about all of this throughout next week and the next few days after that leading into signing day. I want to focus on the transfers, though, because I was kind of thinking about this. They've already landed Phil Dracovic, right? That's their one transfer they've brought in so far, the Boston College quarterback. And they're obviously working on a bunch of other guys. And we've written about these guys every day this week. If you're not following Panther-Lair.com right now, and I don't mean following on Twitter, I mean you're actually reading the site. If you're not on the site right now, you're probably missing out on some of the things that Pitt has been doing in their pursuit of transfers and sort of the headway they're making, the progress they're making with this guy or that guy, and what all is happening. So you probably need to check that out. You see that website right there. Don't click that. That's just an image, but you can just follow read those letters across there and type them into your search bar, Panther-Lair.com, and go read there on the message boards what we've been reporting all week on these transfers. But I thought we could talk today about the needs in the transfer portal and what positions Pitt needs to address and what roles Pitt needs to address with the transfer portal. I think it's important to have sort of a baseline expectation of what they're looking for. And some of this is being, you can pick it up by just looking at their actions, who they're offering, who they're visiting, who they seem to be prioritizing. That's giving some sense of what positions they feel like they really need to address when it comes to the transfer portal. But I think we can break it down a little bit here. And I think the number one priority, and I think this was important on a lot of levels, was finding a quarterback. They without a transfer quarterback coming in, they were looking at going into the spring with one returning scholarship quarterback. Derek Kyler's out of eligibility. Keaton Slovis transferred. I don't expect Nick Patty to come back. It was going to leave Nate Yarnell, one scholarship returning quarterback. Now, they obviously went out and got the high school kid, Ty Diefenbach, he actually committed after Phil Dracovic did. So, I mean, they knew they were going to get a high school quarterback who was probably going to be able to enroll in January, so they'd have 2 scholarship quarterbacks, but that's obviously not enough. And so there was a high priority placed on finding a transfer quarterback, a veteran transfer quarterback who could come in and compete for and ultimately win the starting job in 2023. And that was the most important task. That was the thing they had to work on first. And I mean, it's not even like you just do one task at a time. They worked on 10 things first. But this was probably, if you had to rank the priorities, this was number one, was finding a transfer quarterback and a veteran transfer quarterback, somebody with starting experience who could come in and be the starter this year. And I think they had to get that done right away for a lot of reasons. Not the least of which is the impact that has on, or the way it can impact the other guys you're pursuing out of the transfer portal. If you're looking for receivers, if you're looking for tight ends, you're looking for other offensive players at all positions, and even to some extent some of the defensive guys, just in terms of what you can sell as the potential for the team in 2023, you need to have that centerpiece right at the top. You need to have that quarterback in place. And you can say, here's the guy. Here's the guy who's going to be throwing you passes. Here's the guy who's going to be handing the ball to you. Here's the guy who's going to be taking the snaps. Here's the guy who's going to be leading the team. And it's crucial, for getting transfers, that you can sell them on, this is the guy who's going to be throwing to you. And just as important, and maybe even more so, is retaining guys on your current roster and getting a transfer quarterback who can come in that you can sell to the guys on your current roster. And I think that the chief ones right now are Jared Wayne and Gavin Bartholomew. And look, it's all just sort of rumors and speculation. I don't know how concrete those rumors are about Jared Wayne and Gavin Bartholomew looking at the transfer portal, looking at other options, but playing somewhere else next season. But I think it's a real possibility. It's a real possibility that they're considering it. Partially because everybody's considering it. Everybody in college football is thinking, should I go somewhere else? And the majority of them are saying, no, I should not. But they're all at least considering it. And so when you look at trying to convince Wayne and Bartholomew, and even trying to make your pitch to Izzy Abanikanda, because I'm sure Pitt is trying to convince Izzy Abanikanda to come back for another year. I don't expect it to happen. You don't expect it to happen. I have to think the Pitt coaches don't even expect it to happen. But it's not official yet. And so I think they're at least trying to convince him to come back. But whether it's Wayne, it's Bartholomew, it's Abanikanda, it's the other guys on offense. You really have to approach every offseason of making sure you are re-recruiting your roster to keep it in place. And with all those guys, you need to be able to sit down and say, here's the guy who's throwing the passes. You need to make a highlight film or a cut-up of Phil Dracovic and say, Jared Wayne, this is the quarterback this year. This is the guy you're going to catch passes from. Gavin Bartholomew, this is the guy you're going to catch passes from. Here's how he has thrown to tight ends in the past. Izzy Abanikanda, this is the quarterback that's going to hand off to you, who is going to do such a good job establishing the pass game that there's going to be even more opportunity in the run game than there was a year ago. You need to be able to sell that. Offensive lineman, this is the guy you're going to block for. You need to be able to sell that to the players on your current team, the guys who maybe are considering leaving that you want to retain, that you need to show the promise and potential of 2023 through this quarterback that you got. So you need to be able to use it to help recruit transfers, to some extent to recruit high school prospects, and also to help re-recruit the guys who are on your roster who might be looking at making a change. And that's why it was so important to get Dracovic right off the bat. It was important to get him right off the bat so you have that. It really kind of, like I say, that guy at the top of the food chain whose presence, whose play impacts and affects everyone else, whose success is directly connected more than any other player on the field, and more than any other position on the field, directly connected to the team's success. You needed to start there. You needed to put that in place. Now, whether they got the right guy or not, we'll find out. I felt really confident about Keaton Slovis last year, and that obviously didn't work out. So my confidence in Phil Dracovic doesn't matter. We'll wait and see what he's capable of doing. We know the physical talents are there. We know he's had success playing in Frank Cignetti's offense. Cignetti obviously feels very strongly about Phil Dracovic and believes that he can be a good quarterback, maybe a great quarterback for Pitt. Maybe he can be that difference between going to Charlotte or going to 8 wins. We'll find out. But that it was crucial to get him in place so you could then start building whatever rebuild this offseason is going to see. And it sort of feels like every offseason is going to be a rebuild to some extent. But whatever rebuild this offseason is going to experience, you needed to start there with the quarterback. And then there's the prospect of maybe finding a younger transfer quarterback. I think they're working those angles as well, looking for a good fit to come in and not necessarily beat Jurkovec for the starting job this year. Compete, for sure. But someone who maybe has some experience in college football, who could come in and be the backup for now, and then, compete for and potentially win and take over in 2024. And so they're still sort of pursuing that, but that was less pressing than finding that number one guy, that top guy, which is what they seem to have found in Jurkovec. The next priority, I think, after the quarterback position has been, and is wide receiver. And the wide receiver situation, it's something I was thinking about the other day, and I could probably write more about this than I'm going to say here. I'm not sure how well they've recruited that position over the last 5 years or so. Like, if you look at recruiting classes, right, date it back to, in theory, there are 5 recruiting classes that could be on this year's team, this 2022 roster. And with the COVID year, if those guys redshirted in that 2018 class, that would be the earliest one. So this year's roster, the 2022 roster, would in theory be built from 5 recruiting classes, 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22. Now, if those guys in the 2018 recruiting class redshirted, they were obviously, and then were on the roster in 2020. They would have an extra year that they could play in 2023. So you're looking at 5 recruiting classes that should be on the roster right now, could be on the roster in 2023. And Pitt signed 10 receivers over the course of those 5 recruiting classes, 2018 to 2022. Do you want me to go over the names? Let's start from the top. 2018. They signed Cameron O'Neill and Shockey Jacques-Louis. 2019, they signed Jared Wayne and Will Gibson. 2020, they signed Jordan Addison and Jalen Barden. 2021, they signed Miles Alston and Jaden Bradley. And in this last year's class, the one that was freshman this year, they signed Addison Copeland and Che Wabuko. 10 guys. 6 of them, by the end of this season, were not even on the roster anymore. 6 out of 10 receivers they signed over the last 5 recruiting classes. The recruiting classes that should be building this year's roster, 6 out of 10 by the end of this season, not on the roster. Cameron O'Neill left a couple years ago. Shockey Jacques-Louis entered the transfer portal after last season and went to Akron, had a great season there. Will Gibson from Aliquippa left a little while ago. I forgot where he ended up. I saw it. I think he's at a JUCO or a D3, something like that. Trying to work his way back. Jordan Addison, we know, is at USC. Jalen Barden went into the transfer portal at the end of this season, and Jaden Bradley went into the transfer portal at the middle of the season. 6 out of the 10 gone. 3 out of the remaining 4, Miles Alston from last year's class, and then the 2 guys from this year's class, Addison Copeland and Che Wabuko, jury's still out on those guys. Don't really know what those guys are going to become, what they're going to turn into. Not sure if there's an impact player in there. So if that ends up being the case, you're looking at 10 guys over 5 recruiting classes. And by the end of the 2022 season, you're really looking at 1 guy who's made... Well, actually, you know what? You know what we could say? We don't even have to sort of put any caveats on it, all right? 10 guys over 5 recruiting classes, the 5 recruiting classes that should be building the 2022 roster, the roster we just watched over 12 games. And out of those 10 guys, 1 made a significant impact on the 2022 season. Now, Jaden Bradley did catch 2 touchdowns. That's second most among receivers on the team this year. And he did it both in the same game, and he transferred shortly thereafter. But Jared Wayne is the only one of 10 receivers from the last 5 recruiting classes who made a significant impact on this year's roster, and this year's team, and this year's season. I mean, that's bad. That's bad. Now, there are different elements at play. Shockey Jacques-Louis told the coaches early on that he intended to transfer, changed his mind by the end of the season, and they said, I'm sorry, we've already filled your spot. Jordan Addison, we know what that situation was. We know how that turned out. Barden and Bradley just weren't really where they wanted to be this year. But to have 1 guy out of 10, I mean, it explains why their top 3 receivers this year were Jared Wayne, Bub Means, and Kanate Mumfield, and 2 out of the 3 were transfers. They had to take transfer wide receivers just to fill out this receiving core, just to have, and I mean, like, they took Mumfield at least. I don't think they took Means before Addison left. Maybe they did. But Mumfield, at the very least, was already here when Jordan Addison was still here, so it wasn't entirely a response to Jordan Addison leaving. But by the time Addison left, it became a dire situation, and they're rolling with basically 3 receivers the whole year, save for a few moments when Jaden Bradley was really contributing. But they were basically rolled with 3 receivers the whole year, and 2 of them were transfers, which is a not very good reflection on the wide receiver recruiting over the last 5 recruiting classes. This isn't a 1-year trend, a 2-year. This isn't a 2-year trend or a 3-year trend or something like that. This is 5 recruiting classes, and they really have not produced a whole lot. And now they find themselves in a situation where they have to go to the transfer portal again. You know what I mean? Like, because you look at some of these younger classes. So the 2020 class, they would be entering their 4th year. So either they should be seniors this year or redshirt juniors. Well, it doesn't matter because both of those guys are gone. The 2019 class, they would be entering their 5th season this year. So they should be redshirt seniors. Or, 5th year seniors, guys coming back as super seniors for the COVID year. One of them is already gone. There's only one of them left, and it's up in the air as to whether or not he's going to return. And the younger group, 2021, these guys will be 3rd year players this year. So they would be juniors or redshirt sophomores. There's only one of those guys left. And then that youngest class, Chewabuko and Addison Copeland, I don't think they saw the field for 1 snap this year. They're freshmen. But it's not like the wide receiving core was particularly deep. And so they're finding themselves again going to the transfer portal for wide receivers this offseason. And I think they'd like to get 2 if they can. And they're pushing hard for some guys. I mean, I think that's been, after that veteran quarterback, that top starting quarterback option, wide receivers probably been the position they've pushed for the hardest. They haven't gotten anybody yet, but I don't think there's quite as much urgency. I mean, there's urgency because they need somebody, but it's not quite to the level that getting Phil Dracovic or getting a quarterback like that was. But that's why it's so important, is because they just haven't recruited the position very well. I think when you look at the guys that they've had and kind of where they stand with a lot of these guys, it's not good. There's some very good options in the transfer portal that they're after. And I think they'll get some of the, I think they'll get at least one of their top targets and probably somebody else, maybe a good plan B option. There's good wide receivers in the portal, and they should be able to fill out this receiving core kind of like they did last year, but, ideally with more success. I think they would also like to get a veteran tight end out of the transfer portal. We've seen them kind of pursue 1 or 2 guys. I think there's one in particular I've written about on Panther-Lair.com who is kind of emerging as a top target, and I think they've got a really good chance of landing him. But I think they'd like to get a veteran tight end to play with Gavin Bartholomew, with Bartholomew still as a priority option in the offense, or making him a priority option in the offense, which he didn't really feel like he was in 2022. But I think they'd like to get a veteran who can play with him. Line up next to him, run some 2 tight end sets with a transfer tight end and Bartholomew. If you have that set up with Carter Johnson, as your number 3 tight end, that would be a pretty good tight end group, better than maybe what they had this past season. And probably not better than what they had in 21, but still an improvement. And so I think that's an important position. And then, you kind of move on to sort of generally looking for what good players are out there that you can get who could maybe come in and help you. So an offensive lineman. I think they've got a chance to have a pretty good offensive line coming back, assuming everyone returns. They could always use more depth, of course. But I think if you have an opportunity to get a talented offensive tackle, you go get him. I think they could use a talented interior lineman. If you find one, you got a chance to land him, go get him. And it's the same way with pretty much any position on defense. I mean, I think they, barring any surprises at some key positions, I think they'll return some pretty good players throughout the defense. We'll be interested to see what the secondary does, but I think they can return some pretty good players throughout the defense, but you can always get better. And I think if they have an opportunity, almost sort of like when they took MJ Devonshire. They weren't necessarily thin at cornerback, but they found a player that they thought was really good and he could help them, and they went out and got him. Running back is going to be another position that's going to be interesting to watch. If they have an opportunity to get a playmaker, I think they will. I think they like Rodney Hammond and Sebo Flemister a lot. It looks like they're making efforts to try and bring in 2 running backs in the 2023 recruiting class, guys who will be freshmen next year. But another veteran transfer, if you can get the right guy, a talented guy who wants to come here and work with or maybe even behind Hammond and Flemister, or in some kind of rotation with those 2 guys, you go get him. It's almost like it's a best available player approach, which is not the worst thing to do because there are so many good players out there. There are so many players out there, and a lot of them are pretty good. A lot of them are the kinds of players who can help you win games in the ACC. And so you sort of measure each situation and try and figure out, what makes the most sense here? Is this a guy who can help us? It doesn't necessarily have to be at a position of need, but if it's a talented player, and you can get him, you've maybe either got a connection or a relationship or he's expressed interest, then you go for it. But I think those are the priorities: that veteran quarterback, wide receivers, plural, and like I say, probably a veteran tight end. I think those would be the main priorities right now. I already got the quarterback, at least one of them, and you kind of work from there and see what you can add. Getting these receivers, and I think they'll try to get guys who can come in January at the receiver position. I think most of the guys they're looking at want to come in January at the receiver position. So those will be, the targets to really focus on, and we'll see things happen probably relatively quickly. So should be an interesting week and a half or so, or maybe more if it extends out. If some of these guys drag their recruitment out past signing day, which wouldn't be a surprise with some of the transfers. So we'll see what happens. This is going to be an interesting weekend. Some guys coming to campus for official visits, some recruits. So I think it's some transfers might stop by. We'll see what happens. We'll be keeping an eye on everything happening in the South Side. And of course, we'll have it all reported right there at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. Of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Pitt fans are on the line all day, every day, talking about Pitt fan stuff, and they're doing it at Panther-Lair.com. So I highly recommend that you check it out yourself. Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Can't thank you enough for doing that. Thanks everybody who watched the videos this week. Thanks everybody who liked these videos and subscribed to these videos this week. It's been great to see. We really appreciate it. Hope you had a great week. There was some beautiful weather days in there. Not a great Pitt basketball result on Wednesday night, but encouraging in some areas. And overall, just a really interesting week with a lot of news, a lot of developments. And it's been fun to chronicle it all right there at Panther-Lair.com. And right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So hope you had a great week. Hope you have a great Friday and enjoy your weekend. We'll have lots of coverage of the Pitt basketball game this weekend, plus all the recruiting news you can handle. So don't go anywhere. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back Monday morning for another Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.